Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the Professor, and this is the Moment of Truth. Now, before we get into this morning's briefing, we might as well go ahead and deal with the elephant in the room. There was not a Sunday address due to factors that were unfortunately way beyond my control. And that being the case, the decision was made that rather than try to do some sort of double posting, instead I will make it up to you guys in the future. You can go ahead and take that one to the bank. For this morning's briefing, though, there's something that needs to be mentioned. Many years ago, I coined the phrase that people who do not defend their advocates will have no advocates. And this is something that's been weighing on my mind for the last several days. YouTube has begun their biannual attacks on the new voices of black media. Now, they do this usually every summer to be sure, but they often also pull some mess during the winter months as well. It's important to remember that the black media are perennial targets. Mr. Harvey, aka Your World, has come under attack yet again. And we know when one of us is in the crosshairs, that means that they're going to be coming for more of us in some form or another. This usually takes the form of striking videos, restricting the ability to post new videos, or just terminating channels altogether. For over a decade and a half, I and others have been putting in the work. And the result of that has been we've built ourselves a nice little community here, but as a community, we simply cannot act if we try to exist in separate vacuums. So of course we shout each other out, but to an extent, this put a bullseye on people in this community. It won't stop what we're doing or even get us to slow down. But for the anti-black forces behind the scenes who see the work that we put in and who bristle at it as far as they're concerned, any little thing they can do, however snide, however petty, however childish, it's enough for them. Now, there's been plenty of ideological spheres out there, and yet none of them come under attack like we do. You can have the Alex Joneses of the world out there spouting their nonsense, and unless they deny a mass murder, and even then they have to do it flagrantly, just being stupid about it, that's about the only way anything is ever done about them. We, on the other hand, all we have to do is merely exist, and we start getting targeted left, right, and center. And what is the crime that we've committed? What is it we've done that's so wrong? We talk about how the racism that we face is intolerable and that black people have a right to defend themselves. Now, these people who carry out these attacks against us, what we're doing is we're basically saying that these guys ought to be criminalized, and as far as they're concerned, that's an act of war. Telling black people that racism is not okay, and that black people have a right and a moral duty to fight against it, and telling black people that they are under no obligation to be soft targets, that black people have a right to defend themselves. Well, these white supremacists look and go, oh my God, you're going to be doing things that are going to make it harder to attack black people. You doggone right we are. That's the entire reason that we do this. So for the white supremacists, the ideology that we represent, the talking points that we've caused to proliferate, to them, that is an act of war. But then again, the war's been on for 500 years. None of this should be surprising in the least. Part of warfare is to disrupt your enemy's lines of communication, trying to frustrate the enemy's ability to talk to one another. That's why in war, the very first target that an invading army goes after are the radio stations and the communications towers. They go after their enemy's ability to talk to one another. And during an occupation, like what the Nazis did, they had antenna trucks roaming through the streets, listening, monitoring, trying to find out who was sending out unauthorized transmissions. As people who have been deprived of our power, we don't place the proper emphasis on interfering with the enemy's communications, but we should. We don't eavesdrop like we should, we don't monitor like we should, we don't interfere like we should. Our enemy, on the other hand, does all those things to us. Now, we've decided to try to cover it up, and we try to consider it to be dirty pool, to do the kind of things that they do to interfere with or confuse our enemy's communications. But in war, you can't afford to think like that. When someone's doing things that come between you and your ability to live your life, and they refuse to stop even after being told multiple times, that means you're dealing with someone who is doing it deliberately. Now, what should the response be to a deliberate and intentional attack on your right to live? You fight. That's what you do. The black media is a target of these attacks because what we do threatens the status quo. We don't need to control the horizontal or the vertical. We simply need to make sure our talking points get out there. We reach far more people than our raw numbers suggest. People who don't like us hear our message and react to it. But understand that when we say black media, that includes you. If there weren't so many tens, if not hundreds of thousands of you who are receptive to this message and who have worked to signal boost it, they wouldn't even care. We would just be a bunch of people speaking into the void. The main reason that they attack us, the main reason we take so much flack, is because you guys are the ones listening. You're the ones that everybody's fighting over, because you're the people who can actually be bothered to get off your butts and do things. You're the ones whose morale they want to crush, so stifling your voice is how they intend to do it. This is why I coined that phrase, those who don't defend their advocates will have no advocates. That's the lesson the baby boomers failed to learn during the civil rights movement. When white supremacy cannot ignore the message that you're putting out, if they can't drown it out with counter-programming, or they can't co-opt it by singing bootlicks to pretend to be the leaders of it, then they always resort to the old standby. Kill the messengers. Literally in most cases. Now there is a talking point of sorts that gets dredged up whenever we discuss this kind of a subject, and a question that we usually get on a regular basis whenever it pertains to this issue is, why do we operate on websites like YouTube and Twitter, which are owned and operated by our enemies? The answer to this has been given before, but it needs to be reiterated because it's so obvious. We come here because this is where the people have been concentrated at. They're not moving away from it anytime real soon. These people spend a disproportionate amount of time in places like this. That's a reality. So, should there be other venues of social media built? Of course there should be. Just keep in mind that to create a competing center of attention would of a necessity require large sums of money to draw people's attention, not just to start it up, but to also perpetuate it. People would also expect the same level of functionality as they get from these already established platforms that have millions in funding behind them. Yes, it's a catch-22, but it's one that will at some point have to be confronted. But in any case, have you noticed that even billion-dollar operations like MSNBC and Fox also have presences on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, etc.? These guys have their own networks and websites, and yet they also see it as a necessity to be on these established online platforms too. Members of Congress have YouTube channels. People who get kicked from the major networks start them too. And why is that? Because this is where the people are, especially the young people. If the black media wasn't out here pushing this message, then you wouldn't have some of these mealy-mouthed DJs like the breakfast schlubs having been forced to start talking like us. We didn't have to water down or dilute or derange or twist our message to sound like them. They had to start changing what they said to sound more like us. That's the power of persistence. We push for reparations, and where's the so-called real reparations activists like Cobra at? See, we're talking about cash reparations, and they're talking about vouchers for HBCUs. The NAACP spoke up on reparations, though. They came out against cash reparations, so that tells you everything you need to know about them. How come they never beat the drum for reparations? Because they're controlled opposition. Their job is to confuse our internal politics, to tell us that they're talking to people in D.C., yeah, like Negro Jim Clyburn and other do-nothing bootlicks. And they try to act like they're really pressing our demands. And then we're supposed to sit on our hands and do nothing while we wait for them to do, well, something. And we've been waiting for generations now. Family, you need to learn to recognize a scam when you see one. The congressional black talkers went to the mat for everybody from gay nightclubs to illegal alien children, but for the black grassroots, you know their voter base, they stay away from us as far as possible. They don't advocate for anything that we do. You haven't seen any of these CBC clowns talking to any of us, and there's a reason for that. Joke Reed knows about us, and she's dedicated entire shows to calling us Russian bots. So pushing for reparations is just foreign propaganda? That's what she said. She didn't even pretend to pay lip service to the idea that there was anything legit about it. If it was coming from us, it was Vladimir Putin. That was her message. And we know what that really means. Joy Reid was signaling to the feds and these social media companies that they need to do something about all of these people demanding reparations. Something needs to be done. What she was talking about was prosecutions from the feds and deplatforming by these online websites. And just in case anybody doubts that Joke Reid is actually opposed to reparations, when's the last time or any time that you've seen her beating the drum saying there needs to be reparations for the people who are descended from America's slaves? Have you ever heard her talk about that? No, she doesn't. And she doesn't give any time to anyone who does. And just to show you it wasn't a coincidence, Joy Reid wasn't alone. You had Tiffany Cross, who actually attacked Brother Tariq by name, simply for the crime of saying that black people should do like everybody else and demand something before we give someone our vote. That's common sense. But look who it is, the Negroes that you see working for the white media who say, y'all are Russian bots, y'all are the enemy, y'all need to be stopped. So since they failed to ignore us out of existence, and they failed to raise up a gang of bootlicks who were supposed to be counter-programming against us. They instead decided to come out against us, but only obliquely, terrified to even mention our names. So on the one hand, these harassing maneuvers that the white media carries out, they do happen to be annoying, but by the same token, they also confirm for us they hear us and they fear us. They fear this message because of the change that it can bring. They fear this message because it's reaching the right people, you. But most of all, they fear it because an uncompromising message like this shows that we don't fear them. When black people begin losing their fear of these white supremacists, when black people begin losing their fear of these anti-black racists, that's when things start to change, and not before. So the bad guys can go ahead and continue trying to shut down channels or otherwise put strikes on them, anything to disrupt the regular flow of the information that we present, but it's not going to stop us at all. Because if there's one thing that we've learned after a decade and a half of taking on these white supremacists online, it's that the message is so much greater than the medium. Good day, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors: Frederica Moore, Morris Bodden, Maurice Tariq L., Andrew Lewis, and Raquel Graham. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.